Hello, sir.
Hi, Isaac.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
So, what was it that you just got done doing an interview for?
I got done doing an interview for a show that's going to be running on the Al Jazeera network.
Beautiful.
I had just conducted a social experiment on consciousness, and they heard what I was doing and interviewed me.
So, what was the experiment?
The experiment was conducted all across the plaza here in New York, at One Liberty Plaza. I had a proposal, and I went around and tried to find tactically placed people throughout the crowd, meaning I needed a network of people who would act together but were separately placed equidistantly or nearly equidistantly from each other throughout the entire area that the protesters are currently taking up. And I went to these individuals and I said something like this. Hello. I was wondering if you would listen to a request and decide for yourself if you'd like to involve yourself with an experiment within this democratic experiment we're already doing here on Wall Street. And generally people have been very accepting and willing of this. So I continue with, my name is Matthias Lovemotor. I've been living here on the square for getting close to a week now. And my original intention for coming was merely that I had found a displeasure within myself of hearing that there was this giant protest going on that is very important for the development of a new society which will work for everyone. And I didn't hear about it until about a week after it started. And I was concerned about the mass media underrepresenting what's been going on, and I wanted to come out and see this for myself. One of the observations that I've made while living on the square is that there are a number of different voices that have different problems and have come to Wall Street to voice different opinions. We all come from different backgrounds, and we have different deficits. We come from different locations, and all of this amalgamates into having different messages as we're protesting, attempting to be one. However, acting as one is different from being angry as one, and it seems that being angry is reactionary, which is kind of old language for allowing things to happen to you and then doing something about it once you're riled up in anger or sadness. And this is how they've taught us to direct our democracy in retrospect. And what we need to do is to respond to the challenges of our era. And being responsive is being proactive. And I believe that what is happening here is not just a bunch of people getting angry randomly all at the same time across the whole globe, but rather an indication that there is a greater consciousness that is awakening all across the world. And in the language of consciousness, I was trying to conduct an experiment with the concept of synchronicity or synchrony, which is when many people collectively do the same thing at the same time with maybe the same intention. Well, it doesn't even have to be people. It's when the same things happen across a broad area that seems to be unrelated, but somehow you know there's a greater underlying meaning of based on what's going on. So in order to organize this, I asked that every person check their watch and synchronize it to my cell phone. And at 2 o'clock, I was going to utilize the established method of circumventing the tactic of not allowing protesters to have announcement or amplification devices, which is called the people's mic. I believe I've described the people's mic in earlier interviews, but I'll just touch on it briefly for the sake of this experiment. The people's mic is a way that we allow natural democracy to occur by anybody who has an idea is welcome to voice loudly into the air, mic check. And the established response is to parrot back for every person who hears the initial mic check responds mic check, thus establishing themselves as someone who is willing to propel the message of any person who is willing to speak up. So I have organized these people so that they would mic check twice, thus creating the most attention in their local area as possible. And I had strategically placed these locations throughout the plaza, making the mic check be as broad across the plaza as possible, which was synchronized by the watch. So, at 2 o'clock, I stood up and looked around. I had placed myself in a location then also that I could observe some of the people that had agreed very strongly and compassionately with my attempt at creating a moment of us having one voice before we go back to establishing pursuit of our own individual needs based on our personal deficits or challenges. The idea being a sort of performance art-based attempt to bring awareness to the idea of consciousness through saying or chanting Om together. Om being, Om. And so at 2 o'clock, I stood up, turned on my camera, and heralded 2 mic checks, which were received by the group. And then I continued to do the Om. And what I observed was that many of the people who had agreed to be a participant in this experiment, even going so far as to change the time on their timepiece to synchronize with my watch, merely sat there and watched me alone, to my knowledge, do the Om into the crowd. And from my personal recollection at this time, there was only 1 or 2 people who actually Om'd back to me, one of them being a person in a suit that was standing right next to me, and many of the people who agreed to do it completely ignored me, despite sitting there and watching me do it and having had talked to them only a few minutes earlier. So that was my experiment, and that was the result of my experiment.
There was one other result of your experiment, that at WXPI, Dave and I recorded ourselves doing the mic check at precisely 2 p.m. So here in Williamsport, you were being represented, and we were all in unison at that point.
Well, that's awesome. I felt strong despite being alone. Maybe I was feeling you guys. Maybe it's just my personality being totally okay with rejection. But I'm really glad to hear that you guys participated.